Iran and US hold nuclear talks in Geneva. US says Iran is ignoring demands. Iran says guiding principles agreed in talks. Here is what is going on between the two countries.
Hello, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. The United States and Iran, they have held a second round of nuclear talks in Geneva. US Vice President J.D. Vance said some progress was made in this round. However, he made it clear that US President Donald Trump has set firm red lines. And according to Vance, Iran is not yet ready to acknowledge or work through them. One of those red lines is that Iran must never obtain a nuclear weapon. Vance warned that a nuclear Iran could trigger a global arms race and pose a direct threat to the United States. Meanwhile, Iran's president earlier stated that Tehran would never abandon its peaceful nuclear program. Following talks with the United States, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that the two countries have reached an understanding on the main guiding principles, but work still needed to be done. Meanwhile, a US official stated that Iran said it would offer detailed nuclear proposals in the next 2 weeks to close gaps in the nuclear talks. Now, with this being the second round of talks, are the two countries close to reaching a deal? To understand this, one needs to get into the history of relations between the two countries. US-Iran relations have been a roller coaster of diplomatic tension, covert operations and shifting alliances. It all began in 1953 when the US and the UK orchestrated Operation Ajax, a coup that overthrew Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he moved to nationalize the country's oil, which was controlled by British interests. This led to the consolidation of power under the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who became a key Western ally, though his autocratic rule fueled deep resentment. By 1979, this resentment boiled over into the Iranian Revolution, with the Shah fleeing and Ayatollah Khomeini returning from exile to establish a theocratic regime. The US embassy in Tehran was stormed, leading to the infamous hostage crisis and severed diplomatic ties that lasted for decades. The revolution marked the beginning of a new era, where US-Iran relations shifted from cooperation to open hostility. In the 1980s, the Iran-Contra affair scandal rocked the Reagan administration. Despite a public arms embargo, the US secretly sold missiles to Iran in a bizarre triangular deal to secure the release of American hostages and fund Contra rebels in Nicaragua. The affair exposed serious contradictions in US foreign policy and led to criminal investigations. The early 2000s saw another major shift, with President George W. Bush labeling Iran part of the axis of evil after revelations of Iran's nuclear ambitions. This triggered a standoff, with the US imposing heavy sanctions to curb Iran's nuclear progress. Then in 2015 came the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal. It was a landmark diplomatic effort where Iran agreed to dismantle much of its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for sanctions relief. But the deal remained controversial, with critics arguing it didn't address Iran's missile program or support for regional proxies. But what have been the most recent developments? In 2018, US President Donald Trump ruled he pulled the US out of the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, launching a maximum pressure campaign with heavy sanctions aimed at forcing Iran into a better deal. Reportedly, in response, Iran gradually expanded its nuclear activities, edging closer to weapons-grade levels. Fast forward to 2020, and the situation escalated dramatically when the US killed General Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike, leading to retaliatory missile attacks from Iran, bringing both nations to the brink of a war. Former US President Biden attempted to revive the nuclear deal, faltered, derailed by Iran's domestic crackdown and its support for Russia in the Ukraine war. While a brief thaw occurred with the 2023 prisoner swap, the nuclear issue remained largely unresolved. As of February 2026, US-Iran relations have reached a breaking point, with tension at an all-time high. The situation is a volatile mix of internal revolution and military escalation. In Iran, widespread protests sparked by a collapsed economy and the plunging value of the rial have turned into the deadliest anti-government movement in modern history, with over 6,100 deaths reported since January. The Iranian regime has responded with brutal crackdowns and severe internet blackouts. On the nuclear front, Iran is reportedly days away from reaching weapons-grade uranium enrichment, holding an estimated 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Meanwhile, the US has deployed an unprecedented dual-carrier presence in the region, with the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford in the Persian Gulf, signaling a clear warning to Tehran, especially after recent threats to block the Strait of Hormuz. US-Iran relations are at a critical tipping point, with diplomacy and military posturing colliding in a high-stakes standoff. Just yesterday, according to Iraqchi, negotiators in Geneva made a significant breakthrough, reaching a tentative agreement on general guiding principles. This marks the first time both sides have agreed on a framework for exchanging texts that could eventually lead to a final deal. While this progress offers some hope, Iraqchi cautioned that the path to a final agreement is still long and uncertain, with both sides returning to their capitals to draft specific terms ahead of a third round of talks in 2 weeks. However, despite this glimmer of progress, one major obstacle remains: the US demands, which have been a significant point of contention. The Trump administration insists that any new deal must conclude not only nuclear limits but also the dismantling of Iran's ballistic missile program and an end to its support for proxy militias. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has made it clear that these demands are non-negotiable, describing Iran's missile program as a non-negotiable right and warning the US that it cannot topple the Iranian government through pressure alone. Compounding the tension is a massive military buildup. The US has deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, to join the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Persian Gulf. This dual carrier presence is seen as a clear signal of the US willingness to engage in a military campaign if these talks break down. In response, Iran has been conducting live-fire military drills in the Strait of Hormuz, even briefly closing parts of the critical shipping lane. As these diplomatic talks play out, political analysts are increasingly concerned about the risk of conflict. The Eurasia Group, a leading political risk consultancy, has put the probability of US military strikes against Iran at 65% by the end of April 2026 if a concrete agreement is not reached. With the stakes so high, the world is watching closely now, hoping for a breakthrough that could possibly avert a catastrophic escalation, but bracing for the possibility of military action if diplomacy fails. The outcome of these talks will likely shape the future of the region and US-Iran relations for years to come. For now, that's all for this episode of Explained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.